Frank Delaney woke up to silence so heavy it felt like pressure on his chest. The old radiator in his small Youngstown apartment usually clicked and hissed before dawn. That morning it didn't. The air was cold enough that his breath showed when he sat up on the edge of the bed, pulling the quilt tight around his shoulders. His knees complained the way they always did, but he ignored them. Habit did most of his living now. He shuffled to the kitchen in wool socks, turned on the faucet, and waited for the water to warm. It stayed icy. Then he saw the envelope on the table. It was plain white. No stamp, no return address. Just his name printed in a neat corporate font, Frank Delaney. His stomach dipped, like he was back on the factory floor and a crane hook had swung too close. He opened it with a butter knife because his fingers weren't steady enough. The first line hit him like a shove. Notice of benefit termination. He read it again, slower, hoping the letters would rearrange into something else. They didn't. His pension, the check that kept his lights on, his insulin paid, his pride barely intact. It was being frozen effective immediately due to plan restructuring. There was a phone number at the bottom and a paragraph about no further obligations. Frank sat down hard. For a moment, the kitchen blurred. He heard his late wife Mary's voice the way he used to when the bills got scary. Frank, breathe. Just breathe. But Mary had been gone 12 years. He pressed 2 fingers to the paper, tracing the printed logo at the top like it might bite him. Halberd Industries. He knew that name the way some men knew the Lord's Prayer. Halberd wasn't just a company. Halberd was the reason his hands were scarred. It was the reason Mary had coughed herself to death. It was the reason his son stopped calling after the layoff, after the drinking, after the long slide into shame. Frank hadn't seen that logo in decades. He stood up too fast, dizzy, and caught himself on the counter. The butter knife clattered to the floor. He didn't bend to pick it up. He stared at the notice, feeling something old rise in him. Anger, yes, but something colder underneath. Because it wasn't just that his money was gone, it was that the same people had found him again. He took the paper to the window where the weak winter light made the fine print easier to read. There was one sentence buried like a secret. This action is consistent with a prior settlement agreement dated April 3, 1989. Frank's throat went tight. April 3, 1989. He didn't need a calendar. He didn't need a search engine. That was the day the South Line exploded. That was the day he ran through smoke and metal dust, dragging men out by their belts, his skin blistering under the heat. That was the day the company told him to sign papers and keep quiet. That was the day his life split in half. Frank lowered the notice and looked at his own reflection in the glass. A thin old man with a white beard that came in patchy, a face carved by time, eyes that had learned how to hold pain without showing it. And he whispered, like he was asking the window a question, "How did you find me after all this time?" Outside, the street was still. Snow sat on parked cars. A city that used to roar with steel now just waited for spring and tried to forget. Frank didn't have the luxury of forgetting. Not anymore. He grabbed his coat, not even sure where he was going, only knowing one thing with sudden clarity. If Halberd was back in his life, it wasn't by accident. And if they were taking his pension now, it meant they were afraid of something then. What had he signed in 1989? What had they buried? And why did it feel like the last chapter of his life had just been rewritten without his permission? Frank didn't drive anymore. His eyesight was still good enough for the grocery store on calm days, but the truth was he didn't trust himself behind the wheel when his hands shook. So he walked. He pulled his knit cap low and stepped into the cold morning. The sidewalk was slick in spots, and he kept one hand in his coat pocket around the folded notice like it was a weapon. His first stop was the corner pharmacy, not because he thought they had answers, but because he needed to see his bank balance on the little receipt machine to prove it wasn't a mistake. He bought a pack of gum he didn't want and asked for the balance check. When the pharmacist handed him the receipt, Frank felt his stomach sink again. The pension deposit that usually posted at midnight was missing. He stood there a second too long, staring at the numbers until the pharmacist asked if he was okay. Frank nodded like a man trained to say yes even when he wasn't. Outside, he leaned against the brick wall and tried to do math with numb fingers. Rent, heat, food, meds. There was no room, not even for pride. He pulled out his old flip phone and scrolled to the only number he still hesitated to press. Lisa. His daughter lived 40 minutes away in Boardman, in a little house she and her husband had bought when interest rates were low and hope was still something you could afford. She called every Sunday, always the same. "How you feeling, Dad?" Always the pause after, waiting for him to admit something. Frank hated that pause. He hated being the kind of father who caused it. He pressed call anyway. It rang. "Dad?" Her voice carried concern instantly, like she'd been waiting for him to break. "Is everything okay?" Frank swallowed. "You busy?" "Not right now." "What's going on?" He could have lied. He could have said he just wanted to hear her voice, but the notice in his pocket felt like a weight dragging his honesty down. "My pension," he said. "It's gone." There was a silence long enough that Frank heard a car pass on wet slush. "What do you mean, gone?" Lisa asked, careful like she was walking through glass. "Got a letter. Says termination, effective immediately." "No. No, that can't." He heard her inhale sharp. "Dad, you worked there 35 years. 37, he corrected without thinking. It mattered. It was his whole life. "Who sent it? Is it—" She stopped, then said the name anyway, quieter. "Halberd?" Frank looked at the gray sky. "Yeah." Another silence, heavier this time. Lisa had been a kid when the explosion happened. She remembered the sirens and her mother crying in the kitchen, the smell of smoke that clung to Frank's clothes even after he washed them. She remembered men from the plant coming by with casseroles and eyes that avoided questions. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. Frank hated the honesty in that question. It meant she already knew what he needed. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm going down to the library. Use their computer. See what I can find." "I'm coming," Lisa said immediately. "You got work. I'll take a personal day. You got a family. You're my family." Her voice cracked. "Don't do this alone." Frank closed his eyes. He remembered holding Lisa on his shoulders at the county fair, her hands in his hair, laughing like the world was safe. He remembered promising her, after Mary died, that he would never be a burden. "Okay," he said softly. "Meet me there." The library smelled like paper and heating vents. It was quiet enough that every click of a keyboard felt like a confession. Lisa arrived 10 minutes later, cheeks red from the cold, hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked older than Frank remembered from Sunday calls. Life did that to people who tried too hard. She hugged him without asking. Frank stood stiff at first, then let his arms wrap around her. He felt how thin she was under her coat, and hated that he might make her carry his weight now. They sat at a public computer. Lisa typed faster than Frank could think, searching Halberd Industries pension termination, class action 1989, Youngstown plant explosion settlement. Results filled the screen: corporate acquisitions, old news clippings, bankruptcy filings, legal summaries. One headline caught Frank's eye: Halberd Industries acquires Midwest Steel benefit plans, streamlines legacy obligations. "Legacy obligations," Frank muttered. "Like we're furniture." Lisa clicked. The article was recent, only a few weeks old. It mentioned a pension plan buyout and terminations approved under federal guidelines. It was written in the clean language of money, like human lives were just line items. "There's a phone number in the letter," Lisa said. "Let's call. Right now." Frank didn't want to. Talking to corporations felt like yelling into a storm. But Lisa dialed, put it on speaker, held Frank's hand under the table, squeezing. A recorded voice answered. "Thank you for calling Halberd Benefit Services. Your call may be recorded." They waded through options. Finally, a woman came on. "Benefit Services, this is Amanda. Can I have your employee ID number?" "I don't have an employee ID," Frank said. "I retired in—" "Sir, we need your ID number." Lisa jumped in, controlled but firm. "He retired in 2010. Frank Delaney, Social Security ending 4421. Typing. A pause. I'm seeing the account, Amanda said. Her voice changed slightly, like she'd found a script. Mr. Delaney, your plan was terminated under a settlement agreement. Benefits are no longer payable. That's not what the agreement said, Frank heard himself say, surprised at the steadiness in his own voice. We were told it protected our pensions. Sir, I can only tell you what the system shows. What settlement? Lisa asked. Can you send the documentation? I'm not authorized to release settlement documents. What? So who is? Lisa pressed. Another pause. Legal department. I can give you an address. She rattled off a P.O. box in Chicago. Frank felt something crack inside him. You're telling me I worked my whole life, I kept my end, and you can just… I'm sorry, Amanda said quickly, like she'd said it 100 times. Is there anything else I can assist you with today? Frank stared at the computer screen where his own name sat in black text. He remembered the day he signed papers in a hospital hallway with his forearm bandaged, a company lawyer smiling too much. He remembered thinking, I'm protecting my family. He hadn't protected anything. Lisa ended the call before Frank could say something he couldn't take back. She looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. Dad, she said, we're going to fight this. Frank wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that in America, if you worked hard and did right, something in the system would catch you when you fell. But he also remembered 1989, and he knew what corporations did to men like him. As they gathered their coats, Frank glanced at the library bulletin board by the door. Flyers for book clubs, free tax help, legal aid clinics. One flyer was bright blue. Free legal clinic, employment, benefits, and housing. Saturday 10 a.m. Lisa saw it too. She pulled the flyer down and folded it like it was a map out of darkness. Saturday, she said. Frank nodded, but his mind was already drifting back to a different Saturday, long ago, when the plant siren screamed and the air turned black. He didn't tell Lisa that the date on that flyer matched the date in his memory, April 3rd, and he didn't tell her the thought that scared him most. Maybe Halberd wasn't just taking his pension. Maybe they were making sure he never talked before he died. Frank didn't sleep much that week. When he did drift off, it wasn't rest. It was the plant. He'd be back under fluorescent lights, the constant thrum of machines like a heartbeat you couldn't escape. He'd hear the warning bell that came too late. He'd smell the hot metal and the chemical tang that made your throat feel raw even when you were used to it. Then he'd wake up in his cold apartment, heart racing, hands empty. On Thursday, Lisa came by after work. She brought chili in a plastic container and tried to act normal, like this was just another visit. Frank watched her set the table, watched her wipe a spot that wasn't dirty, and saw the fear she was trying not to show. You ever tell me everything about the explosion? She asked as they ate. Frank kept his eyes on the bowl. I told you enough. You told me you got hurt. You told me Mom got sick later. You told me the company handled it. Lisa's voice sharpened. Dad, I was 10. I didn't know what questions to ask. Frank's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. For years, he'd held the story like a stone in his pocket. Heavy, private, something he didn't pull out unless he had to. Now the stone was cutting through his fabric. He set the spoon down. They called it an accident. Lisa leaned forward. Was it? Frank looked at the window, at the streetlight turning snow into pale orange. No. The word came out simple, flat, like a verdict. In the months before, Frank continued, we had leaks, pipes sweating stuff that wasn't water, guys getting rashes, headaches. A couple men fainted on shift. We reported it. And? Lisa asked. And management told us to stop whining. Said the plant was within standards. Frank's hands tightened around the bowl. Then one day, the south line pressure spiked. It wasn't supposed to. A gauge had been malfunctioning for weeks. Maintenance requested a shutdown. They denied it. Lisa's face changed, like a piece of her childhood was shifting into a darker shape. Why would they deny it? She whispered. Frank let out a humorless laugh. Orders, contracts, Money. Same reason they do anything. He remembered the moment, sharp as broken glass. The sound first, a deep boom that felt like the building's bones snapped. The lights flickering. The sudden heat. Men shouting. Someone screaming a name. "I was near the loading dock," Frank said. "When it happened, the blast threw me across the floor. I landed under a pallet. My left arm got pinned." Lisa's eyes went wide. "You never said that," Frank swallowed. "I didn't want you picturing it." But she was picturing it now anyway. He rubbed the scar along his forearm, the skin shiny and tight even after all these years. "I got out," he continued, "and I ran back in." "Dad?" "I ran back in," he repeated, because that was the part of the story he'd built his identity on. Not the fear, not the helplessness, the choice. "I found two guys trapped by the conveyor. One was Earl's brother, Jimmy. He was coughing blood. I dragged him, but the smoke was thick. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face." Frank's throat tightened. "Jimmy didn't make it." Lisa covered her mouth. "They said 6 men died," Frank went on. "But there were more. The company only counted what they had to. They did it like inventory." He remembered the hospital, the bandage, the company lawyer who showed up before the union rep did. "He brought papers," Frank said. "Said it was a settlement. Said if I signed, the company would cover my medical bills and guarantee my pension when I retired. Said it would help the families of the dead men, too." Lisa's voice trembled. "And you signed?" Frank nodded. "I was scared. Your mother was pregnant with your brother then. We needed the money. And he said if we didn't sign, we'd be tied up in court for years." Lisa stared at him, eyes shining with anger now. "Did they threaten you?" Frank hesitated. The lawyer's smile had been polite, but his eyes were sharp. He'd leaned in and said softly, like advice, "Mr. Delaney, people who make trouble at Halberd don't get to work anywhere else in this town." Frank had felt it then. The trap. The truth that the plant wasn't just a job. It was the whole economy. "They didn't have to threaten me with a gun," Frank said. "They threatened me with my family starving." Lisa pushed her bowl away. "And Mom?" Frank stared at the table. "After the explosion, I brought home that dust. It was in my hair, my clothes. Your mom would wash my work shirts. She'd cough afterward. But we didn't know." "Dad?" Lisa's voice broke. "Are you saying you—" "No," Frank said quickly, though the guilt he carried never cared about logic. "I'm saying the plant poisoned us. It poisoned all of us. Mary started getting sick a few years later. The doctor called it chronic lung disease. He didn't call it what it was." Lisa wiped a tear. "And you never sued?" Frank shook his head. "We couldn't. We signed." Lisa sat back, stunned. "So that's what this is," she said. "They're using the same agreement to take your pension now." Frank nodded slowly. "They're saying the deal that was supposed to protect me is the reason they don't owe me." Lisa stood up suddenly and paced the small kitchen. "This is insane. It's evil." Frank watched her and felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. Not that she was suffering, but that he wasn't alone with the truth anymore. He reached into the cabinet over the fridge and pulled out a shoebox. The cardboard was soft from age, corners bent. He set it on the table between them. Lisa stopped pacing. "What's that?" Frank lifted the lid. Inside were old pay stubs, yellowed, a black and white photo of him and Mary outside the plant gates, both of them young and smiling like they didn't know what life could take. A pocket watch with a cracked face, his father's, stopped forever at 2:17. And on top, folded carefully, was a thin stack of papers with a familiar logo, Halberd Industries. Lisa's hands trembled as she picked up the first page. At the top, stamped in red, it read, "Confidential. Settlement Agreement." Lisa looked up at him, breath caught. "You kept this?" Frank nodded. "I never trusted them." She flipped through. Her eyes scanned faster, then froze on a paragraph halfway down. Her face went pale. "Dad," she whispered, "there's a clause here." Frank leaned in. "What clause?" Lisa pointed with a shaking finger. It said in plain terms that the company reserved the right to modify or terminate benefit obligations if the underlying corporate entity is reorganized or dissolved. Frank stared at the words, feeling his chest tighten. A trap, written in ink. He thought of all the men who signed without keeping a copy, all the families who trusted the handshake and the promise. Lisa turned the page again, and something fluttered out. A small folded note, tucked between pages. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten, in a messy, urgent scrawl Frank recognized instantly. Earl Macready's handwriting. Lisa opened it slowly and read aloud. Frank, if anything happens to me, don't trust the union. The company buried more than bodies. I have proof. Call me. Lisa looked at him, eyes wide. Dad, she said, Earl is still alive, right? Frank's mouth went dry. Earl had been his friend, his union steward, the man who'd promised after the explosion that they would hold Halbert accountable. Frank hadn't spoken to Earl in years. He didn't even know if Earl still lived in town. But the note was proof of one thing. Back then, someone knew it wasn't just an accident. And someone had proof. Frank reached for his phone. Yeah, he said quietly. Earl's alive. Lisa's voice tightened. Then why hasn't he ever told you this before? Frank stared at the paper in his hand, the handwriting shaking in the dim kitchen light, and he felt the first true tremor of fear since the notice arrived. Because if Earl had proof, and never used it, then maybe Earl was afraid too. Or maybe Earl wasn't the one who kept Earl quiet. Earl Macready lived in a one-story house on the west side, the kind with peeling paint and a porch that sagged in the middle. Frank hadn't been there since Mary's funeral. He and Lisa drove together Saturday morning for the free legal clinic, but Frank couldn't shake the note. His eyes kept flicking to it in his lap, like it might vanish. You sure you want to do this now? Lisa asked as they turned onto Earl Street. Frank's hands tightened. If Earl has proof, we can't wait. They pulled up and parked. The yard was overgrown, winter weeds poking through dead grass. A wind chime clinked weakly on the porch, sounding like bones tapping. Frank climbed out, joints stiff, and walked to the door. His heart beat too hard for a man who'd already survived the worst day of his life. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder. This time, shuffling footsteps came from inside. The door opened a crack, and a pair of wary eyes peered out. Earl had aged like rust. His hair was thin and gray, his face lined deep, but the eyes were the same, sharp, suspicious, tired of being fooled. Frank? Earl said, as if the name tasted strange. Well, I'll be damned. Frank opened his mouth, but no words came at first. The years between them filled the doorway. Lisa stepped forward gently. Mr. Macready, I'm Lisa, Frank's daughter. Earl's gaze softened for a second. Lisa, you look like your mother. His voice dropped. Come in. The house smelled like old coffee and smoke. A small television played with the volume low, some news anchor talking about politics. The living room was cluttered with papers stacked in uneven piles like a man had been trying to build a wall around himself. Earl motioned them to sit. He lowered himself into a chair with a grunt, rubbing his hip. Frank held out the note. I found this in my settlement papers. Earl stared at it like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't reach for it at first. His jaw worked. His hands clenched, then relaxed. Where'd you get those papers? He asked. I kept a copy, Frank said. I got a letter last week. They cut my pension, said it's because of the settlement. Earl let out a bitter sound. Of course they did. Lisa leaned in. The note says you have proof. Earl's eyes darted to the window, then to the front door, like he expected someone to be listening. He stood slow and walked to the hallway. He opened a closet and pulled out a metal toolbox. He set it on the coffee table and clicked it open. Inside were old cassette tapes, a small digital recorder, envelopes stuffed with documents. Lisa's breath caught. Frank felt his own chest tighten. Earl pulled out a folder marked Southline, 1989. He slid it across the table. Frank opened it with trembling hands. The first page was a memo, typed, Halberd letterhead, dated 2 weeks before the explosion. Subject, pressure valve failure, recommend shutdown. Below it, in another hand, Someone had written, "Denied. Keep running. Contract deadline." Frank's vision blurred. That's real," he whispered. Earl nodded. "I got it from a supervisor who didn't sleep after the funeral. He gave it to me in my truck, shaking so hard he couldn't light his cigarette." Lisa flipped through the folder. There were inspection reports with numbers circled, an internal email chain about containment of incident narratives, a list of names with the word problematic beside them. Frank saw his own name. Problematic. "They labeled you," Earl said quietly, "because you were the one who ran back in, because you were the one the news cameras caught carrying Jimmy out. You were the face of what they didn't want people to see." Frank swallowed. "Why didn't you use this?" Earl's jaw tightened. His eyes went wet, and Frank realized he'd never seen Earl cry before. "I tried," Earl said. "I went to the union president. I went to the local paper. I went to a lawyer in Cleveland." He laughed, dry and ugly. "You know what I learned. Proof don't matter when the system's already bought." Lisa's voice rose. "That can't be true." Earl leaned forward, anger flaring. "It was true then. It's true now. The union president took a consulting job 2 years later. The paper got sold and the new owner killed the story. The lawyer's office got audited by the IRS after he started asking questions." Frank felt cold spread through him. Earl looked at Frank, voice quieter. "They came to my house. 2 men in suits. Said they were friends of the company. Said I had a wife and a kid and accidents happen. Told me if I kept pushing, they'd make sure I never worked again." Lisa's eyes widened. "Did you stop?" Earl's face twisted. "I made a deal. I kept copies. I waited." "For what?" Frank asked. Earl reached into the toolbox again and pulled out a small envelope. He opened it and took out a key. "This," he said, holding it up. "Safe deposit box at First Federal. Everything I couldn't keep here. The recordings, the letters, the stuff that would ruin people." Frank stared at the key like it was a live wire. Lisa asked, "Why show us now?" Earl's mouth tightened. "Because Halbert's back. Because I got the same letter you did." Frank's head snapped up. "They cut yours too." Earl nodded, eyes hard. "And they didn't just cut it. They sent a private investigator to my church. Asked people about me, about my health." Lisa's voice went small. "Why would they do that?" Earl leaned back slowly, exhausted. "Because they're cleaning house." Frank felt his pulse in his throat. "What do you mean, cleaning house?" Earl looked straight at him. "I mean they know someone still has proof," he said, "and they're trying to find it before it shows up in court or on the news." The room went quiet. The television murmured in the background like distant thunder. Frank stared at the folder, at the memo that said, "Denied. Keep running." He thought about the settlement clause, the sudden pension termination, the timing. Lisa squeezed his hand. "We can take this to the clinic," she said. "We can show a lawyer." Earl shook his head. "Not some volunteer lawyer in a school gym." His voice was urgent now. "You need someone who won't fold the first time Halbert sends a letter." Frank's mind raced. "Who?" Earl hesitated, then pointed at a business card pinned to the wall near the phone, held there by a magnet shaped like a steel mill. "Maya Patel, attorney at law. Workers' rights, benefits, wrongful termination. She helped a guy from Lordstown last year," Earl said. "One. Made the company settle." Lisa stood. "Let's call her." Frank's phone buzzed in his pocket before Lisa could even pick it up. He pulled it out. Unknown number. His hands went cold. He answered anyway. A man's voice. Calm, professional. "Mr. Delaney." Frank's throat tightened. "Who is this?" "This is Robert Shaw," the voice said. "I'm calling on behalf of Halberd Industries. We need to discuss your benefits claim." Frank looked at Earl. Earl's face went pale. Robert Shaw continued, polite as a knife. "It's important we speak soon. There are documents you have that belong to the company." Frank's mouth went dry. Lisa mouthed, "Hang up." But Frank couldn't move, because the man on the phone wasn't asking. He was letting Frank know. They were already at the door. The legal clinic was held in a church basement that smelled like coffee and bleach. Folding tables lined the walls. Volunteers in name tags moved between people holding folders and fear. Frank and Lisa arrived with Earl and a stack of papers that felt too heavy for what they actually weighed. As they waited, Frank kept seeing the unknown number on his phone, the man's calm voice saying, "There are documents you have that belong to the company." Earl leaned in close. "Don't answer any more calls," he muttered. "They'll bait you into admitting something." Lisa's eyes flashed. "They can't just—" "They can," Earl said. "They do." A volunteer attorney finally called their names. She was kind, young, overwhelmed. She listened as Frank explained the pension termination and the old settlement. Lisa slid the memo across the table like a grenade. The volunteer's eyes widened. "This is serious. Can you help?" Lisa asked. The attorney hesitated. "I can give you general guidance, but if this involves a major corporation and a decades-old settlement, you need a specialist. This clinic isn't equipped." Frank felt his heart sink. Then the attorney wrote a name on a sticky note. "Maya Patel," she said. "She's in town today. She sometimes stops by. If you see her, talk to her." Earl's mouth tightened. "Told you." They waited again, watching the room. Frank's leg bounced under the table without his permission. The basement lights hummed overhead. Then a woman walked in wearing a plain winter coat and carrying a briefcase that looked too expensive for a place like this. She wasn't tall, but she moved with purpose, eyes scanning the room like she was counting exits. Earl stood up. "That's her!" Lisa lifted her hand. "Miss Patel." The woman turned. She had dark hair pulled back, sharp eyebrows, and a face that looked tired in a way only people who fight for a living get tired. "Yes?" Earl approached first. "Earl McCready, we need help." Maya's gaze flicked from Earl to Frank, then to Lisa. "What kind of help?" Frank held out the notice. "They cut my pension." Maya took it, read quickly, then looked at Frank with a calm that steadied the air around them. "Halberd?" she said. Frank nodded. Maya's jaw tightened. "They've been busy lately." Lisa pulled out the folder. "We have proof they caused the explosion in 1989. We think they're using the settlement to erase their obligations." Maya's eyes sharpened. "Proof?" Lisa slid the memo across. Maya read. The muscles in her face shifted, controlled but unmistakable. She looked up slowly. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Earl said, "I've been sitting on it for a long time." Maya took a breath. "Okay. First thing, you don't show this to anyone else until we talk in private. Not a clinic. Not a reporter, not even a friend you love." She looked at Frank. "Do you understand?" Frank nodded. "Why?" "Because corporations don't just defend themselves in court," Maya said. "They defend themselves in your life. They dig. They intimidate. They try to isolate you." Lisa's voice shook. "They already called him, said he has documents that belong to them." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Who called?" Frank described the voice. The name Robert Shaw. Maya's face hardened. "Shaw is one of their outside counsel. He's not calling to be helpful. He's calling to see if you're scared." Frank felt something bitter rise. "Well, I am." Maya leaned forward. "That's okay. We can work with scared. What we can't work with is alone." She handed the notice back. "Do you have income besides the pension?" "Social Security," Frank said. "Not enough." Maya nodded. "Then this isn't just a legal fight. It's survival. We're going to treat it like that." Lisa exhaled, relief mixed with anger. "Can you take the case?" Maya looked at the memo again. "I can," she said, "but I need to be honest. This will get ugly. Halberd will claim the settlement bars everything. They will say your proof is stolen. They will try to discredit you. They will try to make you look like a bitter old man chasing money." Frank's cheeks flushed. "I'm not chasing money. I'm chasing what they promised." Maya's expression softened slightly. "That's the right reason. It's also the reason juries listen. But we have to be smart." She pulled out her phone and typed, "I'm going to schedule an emergency meeting Monday morning at my office. Bring everything. Originals if you have them, copies if you don't." Earl hesitated. "What about my safe deposit box?" Maya's eyes locked on him. "Do not go alone." Frank felt a chill. You think they'll— I think they already know, Maya said quietly. And I think they'll move fast. Lisa's voice rose. How? How would they know? Maya tapped the folder. Because this memo exists. Because someone at Halberd remembers who survived and who didn't. Because you got a call from Shaw the same day you walked into Earl's house. She looked at Frank. They're watching patterns. Frank's mind flashed to the overgrown yard, the quiet street, the feeling of being exposed. Maya stood. Let me give you a rule. From now on, assume you're being observed. Don't panic. Just be careful. Lisa nodded, fierce. Okay. Maya handed Lisa a card. If anything happens, if you feel followed, if someone shows up at your door, if you get another call, call me. Frank took the card too, like it was something he could hold on to. As they left the basement, the winter air hit Frank's face like a slap. He pulled his coat tighter, scanning the parking lot. A dark sedan sat near the curb, engine running. The windows were tinted. Frank told himself not to assume. Then the sedan's headlights turned on, and the car rolled forward slowly, matching their pace as they walked to Lisa's vehicle. Lisa noticed too. Her voice went low. Dad, is that— Earl's face went gray. That's them. Frank's heart hammered. He grabbed Lisa's arm. Get in the car! They moved fast, doors slamming, locks clicking. Lisa started the engine with shaking hands and pulled out. The sedan followed. Frank watched it in the rearview mirror, feeling a lifetime of factory noise and legal paper collapse into one simple truth. Halberd wasn't going to wait for Monday. They were coming now. And whatever was in Earl's safe deposit box was valuable enough to scare them into showing their teeth. Lisa drove like she was trying to outrun a storm. The sedan stayed behind them through 2 turns, then 3. At a stoplight, it pulled up in the next lane, just far enough that Frank could see a man's silhouette behind the wheel. No wave, no gesture, just presence. Maya's rule echoed in Frank's head. Assume you're being observed. Don't panic. Be careful. Lisa took an abrupt right into a grocery store parking lot, then looped out another exit. The sedan continued straight. Lisa's hands were white on the steering wheel. Was that really them? Earl stared out the window. I'd bet my last dollar. Frank's chest hurt with the effort of staying calm. They want to scare us. Lisa's voice trembled. It's working. Back at Frank's apartment, they sat at the kitchen table and spread out the documents again. It felt reckless now, like holding a match in a room full of gas. Maya called that evening. I heard you were followed, she said. Lisa texted me. Frank was startled. Lisa met his eyes, unapologetic. Maya continued. Listen carefully. Tonight, put the originals somewhere safe. Not your apartment, not your car. Somewhere with security. Earl cleared his throat. My safe deposit box. Good, Maya said. But we need to move what's in there, too. And we need to do it in daylight, with witnesses if possible. Tomorrow's Sunday, Lisa said into the phone. Banks are closed. Maya's tone tightened. Then we wait until Monday morning. Earl, do you have anyone you trust to stay with you tonight? Earl snorted. Trust? In this town? Maya didn't laugh. This isn't a joke. Halberd has resources. If they're moving, they might try to take what you have. If you go home alone, you're vulnerable. Earl's eyes flicked to Frank, then away. I'll stay here, he muttered. Frank didn't love that idea. His apartment was small, his life already cramped, but he nodded. You can take the couch. After the call, Lisa cleaned up the papers with a carefulness that looked like prayer. She put the settlement, the memo, the note, all into the shoebox and taped it shut. Then she slid it under Frank's bed like hiding it could keep it alive. That night Frank lay awake listening to the building settle, to Earl's soft snoring from the couch, to the distant sound of a train that no longer carried steel. At 2:17 a.m., the cracked pocket watch on his nightstand caught the faint street light. The hands were frozen there, as if time itself had stopped on the moment everything broke. Frank's eyes stung. He thought of Mary, of her lungs, of the way she'd tried to smile through pain so Lisa wouldn't be afraid. He thought of his son, Danny, who had left town at 20 and never really came back. not in the ways that mattered. The last time Frank spoke to him, Danny had said, "You always picked the plant over us." Frank had wanted to argue, but the truth had been too complicated for a phone call. Now the plant was reaching into Frank's old age, still picking him. A thud came from the hallway. Frank sat up, heart jolting. Another sound, metal scraping. He slid out of bed silently and crept to the door. The apartment's thin walls made every noise feel close. Earl was awake too. Frank saw him sitting on the couch in the dim light, eyes narrowed. "Did you hear that?" Frank whispered. Earl nodded, mouth tight. He reached under the couch cushion and pulled out something Frank didn't expect. A small revolver. Frank's stomach turned. "Earl, relax," Earl whispered back. "I ain't looking for trouble. I'm making sure trouble don't walk in and take what's ours." Lisa appeared in the doorway, hair messy, face pale. "What's happening?" The doorknob turned. Slowly, Frank's blood went cold. Their apartment door never moved like that unless someone had a key. The knob jiggled, stopped, then turned again with more force. Earl stood, gun low at his side, and moved toward the door like a man returning to a war he never left. Frank stepped in front of Lisa instinctively, his body remembering how to shield. The lock clicked. Then the door stopped moving, as if whoever was outside had felt resistance and reconsidered. Silence. Frank held his breath until his lungs burned. A soft sound came from the hallway, footsteps retreating. Earl leaned his forehead against the door for a second, eyes closed. Lisa whispered, "Someone tried to get in." Frank's voice was hoarse. "How?" Earl looked back at them, and his face was grim. "Because someone made a copy of your key at some point, or because the building manager sold it, or because Halberd paid for it." Frank felt anger spike, sharp enough to steady him. Lisa grabbed her phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling the police." Earl shook his head hard. "No." Lisa stared. "Why not?" "Because you don't want a report that says, 'old man with a gun and documents' and Halberd in the same sentence," Earl said. "Because if the cops show up, half the city will know by morning." Frank hated that Earl was probably right. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "So what do we do?" Frank looked down at his hands, at the scars, at the tremor. He remembered running into smoke for strangers. Now he had to run into a different kind of fire. "We move," Frank said. "Right now." Lisa blinked. "Move where?" Frank reached under his bed and pulled out the taped shoebox. He held it like it was his heart. "We take everything to your house," he said. "Tonight and Monday we go straight to Maya and straight to the bank." Earl nodded. "And we don't go back to normal until this is over." Lisa wiped her cheeks and nodded too, fierce now. As they packed in the dark, Frank glanced at the door again. He couldn't see the hallway, couldn't see whoever had been there, but he felt them, and in that feeling was a message clear as any typed notice. They knew where he lived. They knew he still had the papers. And next time, they might not stop at the doorknob. Lisa's house was warm, the kind of warmth Frank wasn't used to anymore. The smell of laundry detergent and someone else's dinner clung to the air. It should have felt comforting. Instead, Frank felt like he was bringing poison across her threshold. Mark, Lisa's husband, stood in the living room in sweatpants and a faded brown sweatshirt, eyes alert and confused when he saw Frank and Earl carrying bags at almost 3 in the morning. "Lisa?" Mark said. "What's going on?" Lisa set the shoebox on the dining table like it was evidence. "We got followed," she said. "Someone tried to get into Dad's apartment." Mark stared at Frank. "Is that true?" Frank hated the way shame rose in him. Automatic. "Yeah." Mark rubbed his face. "Did you call the cops?" Lisa shook her head. "We can't." Mark's eyebrows lifted. "We can't?" Earl stepped forward, voice rough. "It's Halberd." Mark's face changed. He'd never worked at the plant, but everyone around here grew up in its shadow. "Halberd doesn't exist anymore," he said. Frank's laugh came out bitter. "Tell that to my pension." Mark looked at the shoebox. "What's in there?" Lisa opened it and started laying out papers. Mark's expression moved from skepticism to disbelief to anger in about 30 seconds. "Jesus," he whispered, reading the memo. "They knew." Caleb came down the stairs in pajama pants, hair sticking up, drawn by the noise. He was 19, broad-shouldered, the kind of kid who looked like he wanted to protect things but hadn't figured out how yet. He saw Frank and froze. "Grandpa?" Frank forced a smile. "Hey, buddy." Caleb's eyes flicked to the papers. "What happened?" Lisa hesitated. Mark nodded at her. Permission and fear mixed. Lisa said, "They took Grandpa's pension, and we think it's tied to something that happened before you were born." Caleb stepped closer, eyes narrowing as he read a line over Mark's shoulder. "This is corporate stuff," he said. "Like, they're coming after you?" Frank didn't want to put that weight on Caleb, but lies didn't work anymore. "Yes," Frank said. Caleb's jaw clenched. "Then you're not doing this alone." Mark sighed, then nodded. "We're in," he said quietly, "but we do it smart." Frank felt a strange surge of gratitude, the kind that made his throat burn. He'd spent years thinking he'd broken his family. Maybe it wasn't too late to mend something. On Monday morning, they drove in 2 cars. Maya's office was in a small building near downtown, above a dentist and next to a bail bonds place. The sign on the door read, "Patel Law, Workers' Rights and Benefits." Inside, the office smelled like paper and strong coffee. Maya met them at the door, phone already in hand, eyes focused. "You brought everyone," she said, looking at Mark and Caleb. Lisa said, "We need support." Maya nodded once. "Good." They laid everything out on Maya's conference table. She took photos of the documents with her phone, then made copies, then put the originals in a locking file cabinet. "Now," Maya said, "we go to the bank." First Federal was bright and polished, the kind of place that tried to look calm even when it was holding people's secrets. Earl's hands shook as he signed the slip. Frank watched him, realizing how much fear Earl had carried for decades. A bank manager escorted them to a private room. Earl inserted the key into a small box and opened it. Inside were more folders, more papers, a stack of cassette tapes, a small notebook with names and dates, and a sealed envelope marked, "If I'm gone." Earl stared at that envelope like it might explode. Lisa whispered, "Earl." Earl swallowed. "I wrote that after the guys came to my house." He looked at Frank. "Never thought I'd be opening it." Maya's voice was steady. "We'll inventory everything. We'll move it to my office. Then we'll decide what to do." Caleb picked up one cassette tape carefully. The label was handwritten. "Meeting 589. "What's on these?" Caleb asked. Earl's eyes were distant. "Voices," he said. "People talking like they owned the world." Back at Maya's office, Maya pulled out an old tape player from a closet, like she'd done this before. She slid in the first tape and pressed play. Static. Then a man's voice came through, muffled but clear enough. "Can't have another shutdown. Contracts are on the line." Another voice, sharper. "If the valve fails, someone dies." Then the first voice again, irritated. "Then make sure it doesn't fail. Or make sure we're covered when it does." Frank's stomach turned. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. Maya's face didn't change, but her eyes hardened like steel. The recording continued. "Keep the narrative simple. Equipment malfunction. Worker error. Offer settlements. Seal it. If the union gets loud, we offer positions. If the press gets loud, we buy ads." Frank felt cold sweat on his neck. This wasn't just negligence. This was strategy. Maya stopped the tape and looked at Earl. "Who is speaking?" Earl leaned closer, squinting. "That first voice, that's Paul Harkins. He was plant operations. The second might be an engineer. I don't know." Maya nodded slowly. "We can identify them." She played another tape. A different meeting. Different voices. "The dust levels are above safe limits. Mary Delaney is not our responsibility." Frank's chest seized. He leaned forward, mouth open, but no sound came out. Lisa turned to him, eyes wide. "Dad, they said Mom's name." Frank's vision blurred. He heard Mary's laugh for a second, like a memory trying to protect him. Then the tape voice, cold and casual, said again, "Mary Delaney is not our responsibility." Frank's hands shook so hard the table rattled. Maya paused the tape immediately. She looked at Frank, voice gentle for the first time. Frank, do you want to stop? Frank swallowed, forcing air into his lungs. No, he whispered. I need to hear it. Maya pressed play. Workers' wives wash the uniforms. If they get sick, it's not traceable. Keep the focus on the men inside the plant. That's where liability is. Lisa made a sound like she'd been punched. Mark put his arm around her. Frank stared at the tape player like it was a window into hell. All those years of guilt, all those nights he'd blamed himself for bringing poison home. They had known. They had calculated it. Caleb's fists clenched. That's murder. Maya's voice was controlled. It's at least conscious disregard. And it's evidence of intent. Earl whispered, I told you it was bigger. Maya sat back, thinking, okay, here's the problem. Halberd will argue these tapes are illegal recordings. They'll argue chain of custody. They'll argue authenticity. They'll do everything to keep this out. Lisa wiped her face. Then what good is it? Maya met her eyes. It's good because it tells us the truth. And because truth, when it's documented, can be used in more than one arena. You mean the media? Mark said. Maya nodded. Possibly, but we have to be strategic. If we go public too early, they'll bury us in court. If we wait too long, they might bury something else. Frank looked down at the pocket watch he'd brought with him, the one that had stopped. He held it in his palm, feeling the weight of his father's life, his own life. How do we make them pay? He asked. Maya's eyes stayed on him. We make them answer, she said. Not just for your pension, for the whole pattern. Earl reached for the envelope marked, If I'm Gone. His hands trembled. He looked at Frank. Open it, Frank said quietly. We're already in it. Earl tore it carefully and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a list of names, with dates and notes. At the bottom was one name underlined twice, Robert Shaw. Lisa's breath caught. The lawyer who called Dad. Earl nodded, eyes haunted. Shaw wasn't just a lawyer. Back then, he worked for the union. The room went still. Frank stared at the name, his mind trying to reconcile it. Maya's voice went low. Are you saying Halberd planted someone inside the union? Earl's face tightened. I'm saying Shaw helped convince us to sign. He was the one who said it would protect our pensions. Frank felt something inside him go very quiet. A betrayal so old it had become part of his bones. Lisa whispered, So the man threatening you now is the same man who trapped you then. Frank looked at the door, half expecting Shaw to walk in. Maya stood up slowly, like a predator sensing blood in the water. Then this isn't just a benefits dispute, she said. This is corruption. And if Shaw is involved again, it means Halberd has been managing this story for decades. Frank's phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. Again. Maya stared at it. Frank stared too, heart pounding. The screen lit up with a voicemail notification. Maya said, Don't answer. Frank didn't. He just hit speaker on the voicemail. Robert Shaw's voice filled the room, calm as ever. Mr. Delaney, we know you've been meeting with people. We know you've been collecting materials. This is your final warning. Return company property, and your benefit situation can be reconsidered. Refuse, and things will get difficult. For you, for your daughter, for anyone who helps you. The message ended. Silence swallowed the office. Lisa's face drained of color. Caleb stood up, breathing hard. He threatened Mom. Mark's voice was tight. He threatened our family. Frank felt his hands stop shaking, replaced by something else, something steady. He looked at Maya. What do we do now? He asked. Maya's eyes were cold and clear. Now, she said, we hit them where they can't control the narrative. She reached for her phone. I'm calling a reporter I trust, she said. Earl's voice shook. If we go public, Maya cut him off. If we don't, they'll pick you off one by one. Frank stared at the pocket watch again, at 2:17 frozen forever. He realized something with sudden, terrifying clarity. This wasn't about his pension anymore. This was about whether his family would be safe by the end of the week. Tom Reyes met them in a diner off Market Street, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed since the 70s. He was in his early 40s, wearing a denim jacket and carrying a notebook that looked like it had been dropped more than once. His eyes were alert, the kind of eyes that didn't accept easy answers. Maya slid into the booth first, then Frank, then Lisa. Mark and Caleb sat in the next booth, close enough to hear but far enough not to crowd. Tom nodded at Frank. "Mr. Delaney?" "Frank," Frank said. He didn't like being Mr. Anything. Tom looked at the papers Maya laid out. "You said you have evidence tied to the '89 explosion." "We do," Maya said, "but we're not handing it over. Not yet." Tom raised his hand slightly. "Fair. I'm not here to steal your case. I'm here to understand if there's a story the public needs to know." Frank watched Tom's face for the slightest hint of greed. All he saw was fatigue and focus. Lisa leaned in. "My mom died," she said. "And it's in their recordings. They talked about wives washing uniforms like it was nothing." Tom's jaw tightened. "You have recordings?" Maya's eyes stayed sharp. "We have documentation and corroboration. If we go public, we do it with protections. We do it with lawyers and timestamps and redundancy." Tom nodded slowly. "Good, because Halberd will come for you, and they'll come for me." Frank felt a chill. "You've dealt with them?" Tom took a sip of coffee. "I covered a pension buyout last year in Detroit. Different company on paper, same consultants, same law firm. Workers lost benefits. Executives got bonuses. When I asked questions, my editor got a call from an advertiser." He stared at Frank. "Money talks, but so does a man with scars telling the truth." Frank looked down at his hands. "I'm not a speech maker." Tom's voice softened. "You don't have to be. You just have to be real." Maya outlined the basic facts without giving away the tapes. Tom took notes, asked sharp questions, tested timelines. "Halberd is not just Halberd," Maya said. "They've reorganized, renamed, acquired, dissolved, but the obligations follow, unless they found a way to cut them loose." Tom tapped his pen. "So the pension termination is part of a larger pattern." Frank nodded. "They're taking what they promised." Tom looked at Earl, who sat stiff, hands clasped. "And you've been sitting on proof for decades." Earl's eyes were tired. "I was trying to stay alive." Tom didn't judge. He just nodded like he understood. When the meeting ended, Tom said, "I'm going to start digging into public records. Corporate filings, court dockets, pension plan transfers. I won't publish until you're ready, but I want to know what we're dealing with." Maya said, "We need a protective order filed. We need to notify Halberd formally that evidence exists and any retaliation will be documented." Frank asked, "Does that stop them?" Maya's answer was honest. "It makes it harder for them to pretend." They left the diner just after lunch. Snow had started again, light and steady. Frank walked slower than the others, feeling the weight of age in his hips. He watched Caleb shovel snow off Lisa's windshield like a guard dog with a purpose. He watched Mark hold Lisa close while she spoke in a low voice, probably asking if this was worth it. Frank wanted to tell them they could back out. He wanted to carry it alone. But Shaw's voicemail was still in his ears. "For your daughter. For anyone who helps you." This wasn't just his burden anymore. That evening Maya called them to her office again. "I filed the emergency motion," she said. Halberd responded within hours. "Hours?" Lisa echoed. Maya nodded. "They were waiting." She handed Frank a thick packet. "They're claiming you're in possession of stolen corporate property. They want an injunction. They want you ordered to return anything related to the settlement." Frank's throat went dry. "They're saying I stole my own life? They're also offering you a settlement," Maya said. Frank's head snapped up. "What kind?" Maya slid a letter across the table. It offered a one-time payment in exchange for a full release of claims, non-disclosure, and a clause requiring him to cease contact with any media entities. Lisa read it and scoffed. "They want to buy your silence." Frank stared at the numbers. The amount was more money than he'd ever had in one place. It would pay off Lisa's mortgage. It would put Caleb through college. It would make the fear go away. For a second, temptation whispered, soft and dangerous, "Take it. Rest. You're old. You're tired. Then Frank saw the line about ceasing contact with media, and another line, buried like the clause in the old settlement. This offer is void if evidence is disseminated. They weren't paying him because they felt guilty. They were paying him because they were scared. Frank pushed the letter back. "No," he said. Lisa looked at him, startled. "Dad?" Frank's voice was quiet but firm. "No." Maya watched him closely. "You're sure?" Frank thought of Mary's name on that tape. He thought of Jimmy coughing blood. He thought of all the men who died and got counted like inventory. He thought of the pocket watch frozen at 2:17, a reminder that time stops for no one, but truth can outlast time if you carry it far enough. "I'm sure," Frank said. Maya nodded. "Then we prepare for war." Tom Reyes called later that night. "I found something," he said, voice low. Frank held the phone with both hands. "What?" Tom said. "Halbert's pension plan was moved into a subsidiary 2 years ago. That subsidiary filed for bankruptcy last month. They're using bankruptcy court to wipe obligations." Frank felt cold spread through him. "So they planned this?" "Yes," Tom said. "And there's more. The bankruptcy judge assigned is a former partner at Shaw's law firm." Lisa, listening on speaker, let out a sharp breath. Tom continued. "This isn't just local. This is layered." Frank's mouth went dry. "Can you prove it?" "I'm pulling filings," Tom said. "But I need to ask you something." His voice tightened. "Do you have somewhere safe to be tonight?" Frank looked around Lisa's living room, at the family photos on the wall, at the warmth he'd brought danger into. "Why?" Frank asked. Tom hesitated. "Because someone broke into my car after I left the diner. They didn't take the radio. They didn't take the cash. They took my notebook." Frank's heart slammed. Lisa whispered, "They're escalating." Tom's voice was steady but tense. "They know I'm looking. They know you're talking. So listen. Copy everything. Back it up. Multiple places. If they take one set, you still have another." Maya's words echoed again. Redundancy. Frank ended the call and stared at the shoebox on Lisa's table, now surrounded by new folders and tapes like the past had spread out across their present. Caleb stood by the window, watching the street. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "there's a car parked outside." Frank's stomach dropped. "What car?" Caleb pointed. A dark sedan sat at the curb across the street, engine off, lights off, blending into the night like a shadow. Frank felt his pulse in his throat. Lisa's voice shook. "Is that the same one?" Earl, sitting on the couch, leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. "I don't know," he said. "But I know what it means." Frank swallowed. "What?" Earl's voice was barely above a whisper. "It means they're done talking," he said. "And it means tonight," Earl added. "Somebody's coming inside." The sedan stayed across the street until after midnight. No lights, no movement, just a shape in the dark. Frank sat at the dining table with the shoebox open, staring at Mary's photo like it might tell him what to do. Lisa had fallen asleep on the couch in a sweater, phone in her hand. Mark dozed in an armchair, head tilted back. Caleb refused to sleep. He stood watch at the window like a soldier without training. Earl paced, restless, one hand rubbing his hip, the other occasionally touching the pocket where he kept the revolver. Frank hated that it had come to this. He hated that his old age looked like fear on someone else's face. At 12:37, Caleb whispered, "They're moving." Frank looked up. Across the street, the sedan's door opened. A man stepped out, hood up, hands in pockets. He walked slowly, not toward the front door, but down the sidewalk, past the house, as if he were just taking a late stroll. Then another man got out. He didn't stroll. He crossed the street toward Lisa's driveway. Mark woke instantly, as if his body had been waiting for the signal. "What is it?" Caleb pointed. "Someone's coming up." Lisa jolted awake. Her eyes widened as she saw the figure moving near the side gate. Earl's voice was low. "Back door." Frank stood, knees protesting, heart pounding. He wanted to tell them to lock themselves in a room and let him handle it. But his body wasn't the body it used to be. Lisa grabbed her phone. "I'm calling 911. Earl grabbed her wrist. "No." Lisa yanked away. "Earl, stop." Earl's eyes were wild. You call the cops, and Halbert gets a report. They get names. They get statements. They make you look crazy. Mark stepped between them. Enough. Someone is trying to break into my house. We're calling. He dialed before anyone could stop him. The operator answered. Mark gave the address, voice tight but controlled. We have intruders on our property. Outside, the motion sensor light snapped on. The yard flooded with white glare. The man at the side gate froze. For one breath, Frank saw his face. Not a kid, not a desperate thief, a professional. Clean-shaven, eyes flat. Then the man moved fast, slipping into the shadow by the garage. Caleb grabbed a flashlight and stepped toward the back door. Caleb! Lisa hissed. Caleb didn't stop. They're here for you, he said to Frank without looking back. Then they go through me first. Frank's throat tightened. Don't be stupid. Caleb looked back, eyes fierce. I'm not being stupid. I'm being family. Mark unlocked the back door just enough to step onto the porch. Frank followed, slow but stubborn. The cold air hit his lungs like needles. They heard a scrape near the garage. Mark shouted, Hey! The figure moved again, and something metal flashed in his hand. Earl stepped onto the porch too, revolver low. Back off, he growled. The figure didn't back off. He raised his hand, and Frank realized it wasn't a weapon. It was a camera. A bright light popped. Flash. The man snapped a photo of Earl holding the gun. Then he turned and ran. Caleb lunged after him, but Mark grabbed his hoodie and yanked him back. Don't chase, Mark said, breath hard. That's what they want. Another figure moved at the front of the house, quick and quiet. The sedan's engine started. Lisa ran to the front window. They're leaving. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Frank stood on the porch, shaking, not from cold, but from understanding. They weren't trying to steal, he said, voice hoarse. Maya's words came back. They defend themselves in your life. Lisa turned, eyes wide. They wanted a picture. Mark's face tightened. They wanted to show the cops an armed threat. Earl lowered the gun, realizing it too late. His shoulders sagged, old and heavy. The police arrived within minutes, lights washing the house in red and blue. 2 officers approached, hands near their holsters. Sir, one officer said, seeing Earl. Put the weapon down. Earl did, slowly, carefully. Mark explained what happened. The officer listened, skeptical, writing notes. When Mark mentioned being followed, the officer's expression shifted into that familiar look, half disbelief, half annoyance. Do you have any evidence? The officer asked. Frank almost laughed. Evidence? Like the whole system hadn't been built to deny it. Lisa pointed toward the street. There was a sedan. It just left. The officer shrugged. No plate? No description? Caleb snapped. It was dark. We were trying not to get hurt. The second officer pulled Mark aside and spoke in a low voice. Frank caught only fragments. Gun on the property. Could have been a neighbor. Be careful who you accuse. Frank's chest tightened. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't protection. It was warning. When the officers left, Lisa collapsed onto the couch, shaking. They're setting us up, she whispered. Earl stared at his hands. They wanted me in cuffs, he said. Frank sat beside Lisa and took her hand. His skin was rough, hers warm and soft, the same contrast it had been when she was a kid. I'm sorry, he said. Lisa looked at him, eyes wet. No, she said fiercely. I'm glad we know who they are. Mark paced. What do we do now? They'll use that photo. They'll say we're dangerous. Frank stared at Mary's photo again. He felt an old resolve settle in him, quiet and solid. We stopped letting them control the story, he said. Lisa wiped her face. How? Frank looked at Caleb. We tell it, he said, before they bury it. Maya arrived at dawn, coat over her pajamas, hair still damp like she'd showered and run out. She listened to what happened, jaw tight. They're building a narrative, she said. Old men with guns, angry families, stolen documents. They want to make you look unstable. Frank's voice was steady. Then we show the world what stable looks like. Maya studied him. Are you ready to go public? Frank thought of the pension letter, the clause, the tapes, the names, the men who died. He nodded. Yes. Maya exhaled and pulled out her phone. Then today, she said, we file our response in court, and today we give Tom enough to publish. Lisa swallowed. And what if they come harder? Frank's eyes didn't leave Maya's. Then they do it in the daylight, he said. And for the first time since the notice arrived, Frank felt a strange thing in his chest, not safety, but momentum. By noon, Tom Reyes's first story was live. It wasn't a screaming headline. Tom wrote like a man who knew real pain didn't need decoration. Retired workers say pension cut tied to 1989. Plant explosion. Documents suggest company knew of danger. He didn't name the tapes yet. He didn't publish the memo in full. He framed it as an investigation in progress, anchored in Frank's face and Frank's voice. Tom included a photo of Frank from the old black-and-white picture outside the plant gates, taken when Frank was young and Mary was alive. Next to it, Tom placed a recent photo of Frank standing outside Maya's office, holding the pension notice. Two versions of the same man. One hopeful, one tired. Both real. The story spread faster than Frank expected. Former Halbert workers started calling Maya's office. Some left voicemails sobbing. Some left angry messages. Some just said, I thought I was the only one. By afternoon, Maya had a dozen new clients. By evening, she had 100 emails. Halbert responded with a statement within hours. We take allegations seriously. Halbert Industries has always complied with safety regulations. Pension adjustments are being administered in accordance with federal law. They didn't mention the dead men. They didn't mention Mary. They didn't mention the memo. They mentioned federal law. On Wednesday, Frank sat in a conference room at a downtown hotel for a court-ordered mediation session. It felt strange to be in a place with carpet thicker than his living room rug, sitting across from people in suits who treated human suffering like a negotiation. Maya sat at his left, calm and prepared. Lisa sat at his right, eyes fierce. Mark and Caleb waited outside. Across the table sat Robert Shaw. He looked older than Frank remembered from the 80s, but not softer. His hair was silver, his suit perfect, his hands clean. He smiled like a man who had never felt heat from a blast. Mr. Delaney, Shaw said, voice smooth. It's been a long time. Frank stared at him. You were union. Shaw's smile didn't break. I represented workers' interests, yes. You represented the company. Earl's voice snapped from the doorway. Maya had allowed Earl to sit in, insisting his presence mattered. Earl's hand shook, but his eyes were sharp. Shaw looked at Earl like a fly had landed on his lunch. Mr. McCready. Earl leaned forward. You told us the settlement protected our pensions. Shaw's tone stayed calm. I advised you based on the information available at the time. Frank's voice was quiet. You lied. Shaw leaned back slightly, as if bored. Strong words. Maya cut in, crisp. We're not here for nostalgia, Mr. Shaw. We're here to resolve an unlawful termination of benefits and address evidence suggesting intentional misconduct related to the 1989 incident. Shaw's eyes flicked to Maya. Ms. Patel, I've heard about you. Then you know I document everything, Maya said. Shaw's smile returned. So do we. A young associate beside Shaw slid a folder across the table. We're prepared to offer Mr. Delaney a revised settlement, Shaw said. Reinstatement of pension benefits, retroactive payments, and additional compensation. In exchange, Mr. Delaney will sign a non-disclosure agreement and affirm that any documents or recordings in his possession are surrendered. Lisa's hands clenched. You want him to sign away the truth. Shaw's eyes moved to Lisa. Mrs. Garner, I understand you're emotional, but your father is 72. Litigation is stressful, expensive, public. This offer provides security. Frank felt the bait. The word security, hanging there like a warm blanket. He looked at Lisa. He saw the fear behind her anger. He saw Mark's worry, Caleb's restless loyalty. Then he saw Mary's face in his mind, pale on a hospital pillow, trying to smile. Frank turned back to Shaw. You knew, he said. Shaw's eyebrows lifted slightly. Knew what? You knew the valve was failing, Frank said. You knew they denied shutdown. You knew about the dust. Shaw's eyes didn't change. You're speculating. Maya opened her briefcase and pulled out a transcript page, not the tapes, but a written summary with times and initials redacted. Shaw's associate stiffened. Maya slid the page toward Shaw. We're not speculating. Shaw glanced at it for a fraction of a second, then looked up, smile thinner. If you possess illegal recordings, you are exposing yourself to criminal liability. Frank leaned forward, old body creaking, voice steady. My wife died, he said. Shaw's smile paused just slightly. Frank continued, You want me to take your money and shut up. But my wife died, and you want me to pretend it was weather. Lisa's eyes filled. Earl's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. Shaw's voice was smooth again. I'm sorry for your loss, but grief isn't evidence. Frank stared at him, and something inside Frank shifted. He realized Shaw wasn't a monster in the way movies made monsters. Shaw was worse. He was normal. He was a man who had built a life on denying other people's humanity. Maya said, Here's our counteroffer. Reinstate pensions for all affected workers, fund medical monitoring for families, and release the sealed settlement records into the public docket. Shaw laughed softly. That's not an offer. That's a fantasy. Maya's eyes were ice. Then we'll litigate. Shaw's gaze moved to Frank again. Mr. Delaney, he said, gentle now, like a doctor explaining bad news. If you go to court, you might win, or you might lose. In the meantime, you'll be in the news. Your family will be under a microscope. Your grandson will be questioned. Your daughter's employer will hear rumors. Is that what you want? Lisa's face went pale. The threat was dressed like concern. Frank felt the pull. Protect them. Take the money. End it. For a moment he imagined signing, going home, letting the past stay buried so his family could breathe. Then he heard another voice in his head. Not Mary's? Not Lisa's? His own. The voice of the younger man who ran back into the smoke, not because it was safe, but because leaving people behind was worse. Frank sat back and took a slow breath. Shaw waited, confident. Frank looked at the pocket watch in his palm. He'd brought it with him, an anchor. He opened it, showing the frozen hands. This stopped the day the South Line blew, Frank said. Shaw blinked, thrown for the first time by something he couldn't control. Frank held the watch up. You see that time? 2:17. That's when everything in my life changed. He closed it gently. You're offering me money to pretend time didn't happen. Shaw's smile faded. Mr. Delaney, Frank cut him off, voice rising just enough to shake the room. No. Lisa sucked in a breath. Frank continued. You don't get to buy my silence twice. You don't get to threaten my daughter and call it advice. You don't get to erase men like Jimmy and women like Mary and act like it's paperwork. Shaw stared at him, expression finally hard. Then you leave us no choice. Maya stood, gathering her papers. Likewise. As they walked out, Shaw called after them, voice sharp now. If you publish those recordings, you will regret it. Frank didn't turn around. Outside the hotel, cameras waited. Tom Reyes stood with a microphone, his face grim. Frank! Tom called. Did Halbert offer you a settlement? Frank's heart pounded. He'd never been in front of cameras like this, not since 1989, when he was younger and still believed the truth would speak for itself. Now he understood. Truth needed a voice. He stepped towards the microphone, Maya at his side, Lisa holding his arm. For a second, Frank felt exposed. Then he felt something else. A lifetime of being quiet turning into a weight he could finally set down. He looked into the camera lens. Yes, he said. And did you accept? Tom asked. Frank shook his head. No, Frank said clearly. Because my pension isn't the only thing they stole. Behind him, Shaw's team moved quickly, trying to avoid cameras. Frank watched them, then faced forward again. And I'm not the only one they hurt, Frank added. Tom's eyes sharpened. What are you saying, Frank? Frank took a breath, feeling the whole city listening now. I'm saying, he said, we're done being quiet. The camera light blinked, and somewhere inside Halbert's polished walls, Frank knew the panic had started. The next 2 weeks moved like a storm. Tom published follow-up stories. This time he included the memo and confirmed voices on the tapes through records and experts. Widows called in. Former workers came forward. The public finally saw faces instead of paperwork. Halbert tried to shut it down with motions and statements, but the attention was already bigger than their control. On the morning of the first hearing, Frank stood outside the federal courthouse in Cleveland with Lisa beside him and Earl on his other side. Maya walked ahead, briefcase in hand. Mark and Caleb stayed close behind, quiet and steady. Inside, the argument sounded like a language made of loopholes. Shaw insisted the recordings were inadmissible. Maya asked for emergency discovery and protective orders, citing intimidation and long-term concealment. Then Maya played 1 minute of audio. Just one. The judge leaned forward. "Counsel," she said to Shaw, "I am ordering disclosure of the 1989 settlement records and related safety documents. If evidence was concealed or destroyed, there will be consequences." Shaw's jaw tightened. "Your Honor," the judge cut him off. "You will comply." Frank didn't cheer. He didn't cry. He just closed his eyes and let those words land in his bones. Outside, Maya turned to him. "This is the crack in the wall," she said. "Now we widen it." A month later, Halbert called with a new offer. Not just for Frank. They agreed to reinstate pensions for the affected retirees, pay back benefits, and fund medical support for families linked to exposure. They also agreed to create a memorial scholarship in the names of the men who died in 1989. It wasn't perfect. No money could bring Mary back. No signature could return the years stolen by fear and silence. But it was real. When Maya told Frank, he sat at Lisa's kitchen table and stared at Mary's photo. Lisa watched him, eyes wet. "She should be here," Frank whispered. "I know," Lisa said. Frank picked up his phone and called his son. Danny answered, guarded. "Dad?" "It's me," Frank said. His throat tightened. "I finally fought back." There was a long pause. Then Danny's voice softened. "I'm sorry I stopped calling." Frank swallowed. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth." Danny breathed out, shaky. "Can I come home this weekend?" Frank closed his eyes. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, you can." A few days later, Frank stood near the old plant gates. The buildings were mostly gone now, replaced by weeds and a chain-link fence. But people filled the sidewalk, retirees in worn jackets, families holding framed photos, young workers who'd only heard the stories. Tom recorded quietly. Maya stayed in the back. Earl held the cracked pocket watch in his palm like a relic. Frank stepped up to a microphone and looked straight into the camera. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm a factory man who got old, and they counted on me getting tired." He took a slow breath. "They count on you thinking your story doesn't matter once your body slows down. But your story matters, especially when it's inconvenient to powerful people." His voice softened. "If you're watching this and you've ever been cheated by a system that told you to stay quiet, tell your story. In the comments. To your family. To someone who will listen. And if this story means something to you, help it reach the next person who thinks they're alone." Frank looked down at the watch, then back up. "Time doesn't give refunds," he said. "But truth can still do work, even late." When the crowd dispersed, Lisa hugged him hard. Earl squeezed his shoulder. Caleb stayed close, still scanning the world like danger might return. Frank walked to the fence and stood there alone for a moment. He didn't feel young. He didn't feel healed. But he felt seen. And for the first time since 1989, Frank Delaney believed his life was more than what a corporation tried to erase. It was a legacy his family could carry forward. Clean, honest, and finally out in the light.